Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here in June. I very welcome my friends and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. And welcome to episode, is it 15, 14 of Smallville, the saviour of Superman. I'm going to have to check it on my homepage later. We need to be exact. We need to be accurate. So welcome to today's Smallville, the Saviour of Superman. Yesterday we talked about my disappointment with the Smallville series finale. Today I talk about my excitement and pride with the pilot. The Smallville pilot was absolutely one of the best pilots I've ever seen. I would put the Lost pilot and the Smallville pilot with each other because they both open up in a beautiful way. Now, I know the Smallville pilot wasn't actually the first episode of Smallville I saw. I think I might have seen episode 2 or 3 first, and then eventually, when I got the DVD box set, and back then getting box sets was very, very difficult. It's not as easy as now. There was no streaming back then. If you weren't paying to watch, if you didn't have Sky Television, you couldn't watch E4. I mean, luckily, the first season of Smallville did air on Channel 4 over at the UK. But yes, I did miss the pilot, and I did have to wait for the box set. The pilot, to me, is absolutely amazing. The way it starts, it integrates everything so well. And integration in a pilot is so very, very important. What you've got to do with your pilot is very tricky, actually, doing a good pilot, because not only does it have to be exciting, awesome, and epic, but you have to make sure that everybody kind of has got to know the characters and their positions and the framework within what they'll be doing within the future seasons. So it's all very important. So the opening scene is obviously of Clark's ship flying towards Earth. That's very iconic. And then we go to Smallville, and then we see Nell in the flower shop and Martha and Nell having a little issue with each other. Because many people don't know this, but Nell, who is Lorna's aunt, and Jonathan Kent used to date. Now, this is really interesting because they really never touched on it. They touched on it once where Lorna goes, basically my Aunt Nell and your dad used to date and she's a bit sore about it. But they never did that again. They never worked with that. And I think I know why. And I think the reason is they didn't want to do a story where maybe Jonathan's tempted to cheat on Martha because that's not who Jonathan Kent is it? So it just wouldn't have worked. I think there could have been a situation where maybe Martha and Nell didn't like each other at first, but in the end they became good friends. Because they didn't do enough with Martha sometimes, did they? She was literally just the mum cooking apple pies and stuff like that. Which is a shame, and I think Annette has kind of come out and complained about that. Look, I like the version of Martha, I just think she could have been doing more. And I think Kelly and Brian kind of saw that in the final 3 seasons. That's why they made her a senator. And obviously the Red Queen stuff was awesome as well. So you get all of that. And then you've got a really young Lorna, like using her her little toy wand on Martha, and she's telling her to make a wish. And of course, we all know what Martha's wishing for, as Jonathan does in the iconic red truck. Then we meet Lex and Lionel for the first time, and you know Lionel is reading the Daily Planet again, very iconic. And in the front, we can see Queen Industries CEO dies, which is Oliver Queen's father. And that's amazing. Did they always plan to bring, Oliver Queen into Smallville? Whether they did or not, having that front page there was amazing. And so Lionel is starting with his kind of trying to make toughen Lex up. And Luthor's are not afraid or whatever he's saying to him. And then obviously we get the meteor shower. And the meteor shower still now, and I watch this pilot a lot, I'm still obsessed with this show. The meteor shower, the special effects are freaking amazing. It does not look fake. Some of the stuff on Smallville sometimes does seem a bit over the top with the CG, but I will say, I'd say 80% of the CG on Smallville is beautiful. But now and again it looks a little fake because they're using CG using a TV budget, so it's very difficult. But mostly Smallville, and I mean Smallville was really one of the first shows to use CGI. And they mostly did it so well. But let me just tell you that meteor shower looks phenomenal. If you have that meteor shower in a movie, you wouldn't have a problem with it. It is amazing and it really works. And they use CGI and they mix it with practical effects. So you've got Lana by the toy, is it the toy rocking horse, with Nell when she sees her parents. And the parents getting hit by the meteor shower was pretty comical, wasn't it? It's probably the only part of the pilot I can criticise. They're literally standing there, looking up for 10 seconds while this meteor is hurtling towards them. Plenty of time to run off, but they're just standing there going, it's insane. I think David Nutter got that wrong, the director. David Nutter's a great director, but they should have done something differently. It kind of bothers me, but this is Smallville. Its flaws are part of its charm, aren't they? So, apart from that, this is a thoroughly beautiful pilot as well. Smallville was a very artistically shot show, and to be honest with you, back then there was very few shows being shot in such an artistic manner. It looked beautiful when Clark used to look at the sunrise at his kind of barn, or as Jonathan nicknamed it, his Fortress of Solitude. Again, using these Superman terms. It was beautiful. And you kind of thought back then, well, we're never going to see the real fortress in Smallville. And of course we did. They even gave us that beautiful gift. So Smallville was beautifully stunning. So the whole meeting with Clark and Lex in the pilot is absolutely brilliant. But let me go back to the cause of Lex's baldness. Lex has mostly always been bald in the comics. Now, back in the Superboy comics in 1960, he tried to create some chemical thing, experiment. He had an accident, and that's how he becomes permanently bald. But in Smallville, they found a very meticulous, relatable reason for him to be bald, because he was literally that far away from the meteor shower. He wasn't hit, but kind of whatever happened, it made him bald. So already, Clark coming to Earth is the cause of Lex's baldness. But it's not just that. His blood work has been infected by the meteors. Now, he's not a meteor freak, and we'll talk about the meteor freak concept in a moment. But he doesn't get ill anymore. He used to have asthma. And from that moment on, when the meteors hit, he wasn't. So Lex was very much affected by the meteor shower, and that's a beautiful thing. I mean, to bring Lex Luthor into Smallville would have been, I suppose, it would have been risky if they did it in any other way, the way they did. I mean, I'd love to ask Alan Moss, was Michael Rosenbaum their first pick, or did they look at a line of actors? I think they could have gone the kind of direction some of the other Superman TV shows went with Lex, which I think would have been a mistake. They could have made him good looking, with hair, driving fast cars, which he did in Smallville, of course, but they couldn't. It could have been without the depth, but they gave him depth. And that first speech he makes to Clark when Clark gives back the car, and I'll talk about all of this. I'm kind of getting out of sync, aren't I? But when he talks about what happened when he crashes and he died and he flew over Smallville, and and then that immortal line before all that, he goes, "Clark, do you believe a man can fly? I did. When my heart stopped beating and I flew over Smallville." And then he says, "I don't want anything to get in the way of our friendship." He saved his life, and that's important. That's important to Lex. That means everything. It's important to understand we're not looking at a villain here. We are looking at a very traumatized young man who's had a very traumatized childhood, which we'll find out more about within the next couple of seasons of Smallville. But he's not a bad person, and he genuinely wants to reward Clark for saving his life. And there's a great scene, actually, when Clark comes home and he finds the truck that Lex has bought him. And Clark says, "Whose truck?" "It's yours. It's a gift from Lex Luthor." "Oh, where's the keys?" Clark says. "Your dad's got them." So Clark's already fallen in that this isn't going to be as easy as taking the gift. So anyway, Jonathan says, "You can't keep it, son." And he goes, "Why not? I saved the guy's life." So Jonathan says this, one of the first amazing lessons Jonathan Kent teaches the future Superman. He says, "But I saved the guy's life." And Jonathan goes, "So you think you deserve a prize?" Amazing. Amazing. So you've got the trials that Jor-El starts giving Clark from season 2. Really, really difficult trials, But Jonathan gives Clark trials as well. But they're not kind of demonically kind of challenging, but they are lessons. And that's a great lesson. And Clark doesn't get that. Clark doesn't like that. Clark thinks, at that time, he doesn't get it. He thinks, the guy's just given me this. And then Jonathan says, do you want to know where the money came from to buy that truck? Do you remember Mr. Bell used to run a farm down the road? Yeah, well, Lionel Luther said he was going to give him or whatever, right? And then he took his farm and threw him off of it. And that's how the money came from to buy that truck. So Jonathan's really trying to teach his son about the Luthers, that they're a problematic family. Jonathan does not want Clark involved with Lex. Now, Jonathan doesn't know Lex, but unbeknown to us at the time, and it's only when we see that amazing flashback, that amazing twist, that actually Jonathan and Lionel did know each other. Jonathan set up this fake United Charities so they could illegally adopt Clark because there was no other way of doing it. And Jonathan and Lionel had a hold over Jonathan. And Jonathan was the one who had no choice but to persuade Pete Ross's dad and uncle to sell the cream corn factory to Lionel. So Jonathan feels very guilty about this because Lionel had a hold over him. So it's an amazing, and already, so we don't know why Jonathan hates Lionel, but then we find out. So if we go back to the pilot, I think it's amazing the lessons that Jonathan taught Clark. But of course, this is the reason. When they spoke to DC, Alfred Goff and Miles Miller, the guys who created Smallville, the wonderful guys who created Smallville, absolute geniuses, they spoke to DC and they said Clark becomes Superman because of his adoptive parents. And Alan Miles took that literally, and that was absolutely the right way. The lessons he learns from Jonathan and Martha, but especially Jonathan. Jonathan is a very wise character in Smallville, but he's still flawed. He still loses his temper. He can be selfish at times towards Clark and stuff. But ultimately, he's a good man who wants to teach his son the values he believes in. And they're very good values if you're going to be a hero. So the pilot's amazing. So then obviously we're at the Smallville High. We're introduced to Chloe and Pete. Chloe and Pete and Clark are a good little kind of rounded friendship. We didn't really know much about Chloe back then. Pete was awesome as well. And then we see the kind of Clark's crushing on Lorna, but she's with Whitney. Whitney is the football star of the school. Clark doesn't believe he's got any chance. And the whole thing with Lorna wearing the kryptonite necklace is beautiful because when you've got a crush, you feel you can't get close to her. Well, Clark literally can't get close to Lorna. And it's freaking beautiful. These guys, Alan Miles, are geniuses, I'm telling you. And so every time he goes near her, and, kryptonite is an issue. And so what I love about the pilot and the concept of the first season, that they made kryptonite a character in a Superman show. And basically, these things are scattered all over Smallville. And Clark says in one of the episodes, he goes, I wish I could get away from the meteors. I wish I could get away from Smallville. And Jonathan goes, I'm sure one day he'll be able to do it, but now's not the right time. It's amazing the way they made you think. The great thing about early Smallville was you always thought about him becoming Superman one day. And you used to look at Thomas Clark and go, wow, one day this guy's going to become Superman. And it filled you with such excitement. That was the magic of Smallville. That was the magic that Alan Miles sprayed all over this show. But the pilot and the first season were ever so charming. The characters were charming. You wanted to be friends with them. And then, of course, we had the Beanery, and then Lorna ultimately got the Talon, or persuaded Aunt Nell to let her turn the Talon into a coffee shop. And that was great as well. So that, one of my favourite scenes, and I think it's many people's favourite scenes, unless you're a Chloe shipper. And I love Lois, and I love Erica Durance. Can't wait to see her in Elseworlds. But that scene in the graveyard is a genius scene. Now, for you lot who don't watch special features, there's something really funny about that graveyard scene because, according to Alan Miles, they got a bit overexcited with the smoke machine. So if you can see all the fog in the graveyard, that's from a smoke machine. And it became too much and they tried to get rid of it and they couldn't. I love listening. I think there is commentary on the DVD, so you should go and listen to it. It's amazing. So that's quite funny. But despite that little blunder, it's such a charming scene because Jonathan's just showed Clark, after his argument about Lex buying him the truck, his spaceship for the first time. And Clark's just so freaked out. He goes, you should have told me. Then his super speeds away. and he's just at the graveyard. And then Lana sees him, and they have this chat. And she goes, look, I'm here to see my parents. They died in the day of the meteor shower. And one of the most beautiful things, I might cry in a minute, beautiful things about this, and this is so freaking Superman, that Alan Miles totally got this character. And this is what I loved about it, is Clark always feels responsible for the meteor shower and the people who died and that were infected by the meteor. So when she tells him that he died, when they died in the day of the meteor shower, Clark goes, I'm sorry. But Clark doesn't just say, I'm sorry like you and I would. We would say I'm sorry and we don't care. Clark really cares. And that, my friends, is why I love Superman out of any other character. Because the man cares, and that's so important. And then Lana turns around and says, Clark gets this a lot in season 1. It's not your fault, Clark. And it's amazing because he feels it is. And he kind of convinces us in a way that he is, but of course it's not. So an amazing scene, and this is the first time they've really spoken. They've lived across to each other for so many years, but they've never really spoken. This is the ice-breaking moment you've got with your favourite girl you've got a crush on. It's amazing. And Christine Krug, I could talk about Christine for hours. She was so freaking charming in this pilot. Amazing. People talk about her looks and things like that, and she's beautiful. She is. Her outer shell is absolutely beautiful. But inside, she allayed so much charm. And according to her on some of the commentary, she said she was very shy at the time when she was young. She used to spend, all she used to do is go back home after work and spend it with her mother, which is awesome, by the way. And really, at that age, they're the kind of cast members you want. You don't want people going out taking drugs and, embarrassing the show. And people like Tom and Kristen didn't do that. They were brilliant, very committed to the project. But Christine had so much charm, and that's why she worked. Because I'm not really one for ships or love interests and things like that. But this is iconic. Clark falls in love with 2 women. Lana Lang as a teenager and Lois Lane when he becomes Superman in Metropolis. And Smallville showed us both those relationships beautifully. And what I love about the 2 distinctions between the relationships is that Lana can never be with Clark because of the way she is. Lana is so damaged by that meteor shower. And ultimately, that never leaves her. And that kind of formed her character. And really, that's why her and Clark could never really be together. But Lois may have been damaged by her mum dying of cancer, but it didn't affect her. It didn't darken her soul. Unfortunately, everything that happened to Lana did darken her soul, because it would do. So Lois is this passionate, bright light, and she's perfect for Clark, and she's perfect for who he is. And it's like in the finale when she says, we shouldn't get married. I don't want to ground you. I don't want to get in your way. That's a woman who puts her partner first. But Clark wants to put his partner first too. And that's why the way Kelly and Brian and Al Miles did all of this was beautiful. But going back to the pilot, like that graveyard scene is wow. No superhero action, no aggression, no drama. It was that first kind of real chat you have with the girl of your dreams. And it was absolute. I loved it. And as I say, my other favourite scene, my equally favourite scene, as I've already spoken about, is Clark and Lex in the mansion, because that mansion was going to set the scene for many, many dramas. Amazing. And there's a bit in that scene I love. He goes, I love the, Clark says, I love this place. He goes, well, I suppose if you're in the market to home. He says something about Lionel building it. He brought it in stone by stone in Scotland. Something Al Miles would use again in Lex and Lionel's final season, and there was a reason he did that. But this is about the pilot. We can discuss that another time. So he goes, yeah, I brought it brick by brick. And Clark goes, yeah, I remember all the trucks rolling in. He goes, oh, my father doesn't live here. So Clark goes, so why did he build it then? And he goes, because he could. And that sums up Lionel Luthor, because he could. So even though we only see Lionel for a few minutes in the pilot, you already kind of understand the relationship between Lionel and Lex. But it's only in the 3rd episode when you really see how twisted. So that's amazing. Now, that's an element you kind of see in the pilot, but they don't over-egg the pudding. they've got so much material to go on that they don't need to do that. So Smallville basically is the perfect pilot. It's got the epic meteor shower. It sets the characters up. You see just enough of Chloe and Pete. You know that Chloe is kind of in love with Clark because Pete teases her about it, and then he asks her to the dance. Clark, we knew in the end that Pete was secretly in love with Chloe. They didn't really go too deeply. They didn't give Pete enough material within his 3 seasons, unfortunately. This is when you know that people don't really trust an artist. And I think when they did give him things to do, he was brilliant, by the way. And I really like Sam Jones III. And I'll say it in many more videos. That the lad had great charm and should have been used more and should have been challenged more. Just my opinion. Anyway, the pilot is one of the biggest achievements in television history. Because here you've got a pre-Superman story. This is, if you get this pilot wrong, people are not going to be interested. He's not Superman. He's not wearing the costume. People were saying before this show hit, why should we be invested in this show? But because you've got Lex Luthor, because Clark and Lex have already met and become friends, and you know one day that's going to change, you know this show is going to become something really special. The relationship between Clark and his friends, between Lana, with his relationship already, his interesting relationship with his father. Already you've got these premises, very interesting premises. And that, my friends, is why Smallville became one of the greatest shows ever produced.